They said you were too emotional. And they were right. That's why they could manipulate you. That's why they could lie to your face and watch you question your own memory. That's why they always came back when it was convenient. You didn't just feel, you carried the weight of everyone's silence. You translated pain into patience. You blamed yourself, even when they knew exactly what they were doing. You were told to move on, but no one tells you how to move when the damage is invisible. They never hit you. They didn't have to. They just disappeared when you needed them the most. Then reappeared the moment you started to heal, just to test if the door was still open. And every time you let them in, you gave them more proof that their absence meant more to you than their presence ever did to them. That's how they kept control. Not by force, by emotion. Because when someone knows what hurts you, they don't need to raise their voice, they just need to withdraw. Wait, and watch you bleed in silence. You thought loyalty would win them over. You thought understanding would change them. But there's a reason they only loved you when you were easy to break. They fed off your reactions. They relied on your empathy. They used your emotions against you like currency. And when they ran out of things to take, they blamed you for giving too much. But here's what they never expected. You stopped reacting. You stopped waiting. You stopped explaining pain to people who caused it. That wasn't a phase. That wasn't you shutting down. That was the beginning of something they couldn't touch. You didn't go numb. You chose clarity. You realized that emotion, when uncontrolled, becomes a leash, and they held the other end. So you dropped it. You let go of the need to be seen. You burned the fantasy of closure. You stopped begging for understanding from people who benefit from your confusion. You didn't stop feeling. You started mastering it. And now you don't react. You study. You don't chase. You move in silence. You don't break. You vanish. That's what they fear the most. The version of you that doesn't need to explain himself. The version that listens, watches, and walks away. Because when you learn to feel nothing, they lose every weapon they ever had. And what you gain is everything. Today, let me speak to your soul. Let me teach you 5 ways to feel nothing from bad people and control everything. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification button for more of this. Now let's get into it. What if the only way to win is to stop feeling, not forever, just long enough to take your power back? They told you feeling was strength, that vulnerability was noble, that if you kept loving harder, forgiving faster, breaking open wider, you'd finally be seen. But the truth is, the more you felt, the more they fed. You became easy to reach, easy to manipulate, easy to break. Because when your emotions are exposed, your enemies don't need to lift a finger. They just need to remind you of your past, of what they did, of who left. And suddenly, you collapse from wounds they haven't touched in years. That's the war they never speak about. Not the war outside, the war within. The war between who you are and who they convinced you to be. The version of you that people used and left. The version that thought silence was peace, when really, it was punishment. The version that begged for answers while pretending to be okay. That version dies today. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about building something stronger than love. Control. The kind of control that makes you untouchable. The kind that lets you walk through betrayal and never flinch. The kind of control that turns your silence into strategy, your pain into precision, your scars into armor. This is not the kind of motivation they sell you in soft voices and polite affirmations. This is war. A war that begins by erasing one lie at a time. The lie that feeling everything will free you. The lie that they'll love you more if you shrink. The lie that empathy is enough to survive in a world that preys on it. You've been taught to react, to explain, to keep the peace. But peace without power is just permission for them to keep doing what they've always done. You want your life back? You want your focus back? You want to walk into any room, any storm, any betrayal without blinking? Then you need something more dangerous than rage. You need detachment. You need to feel nothing. Not because you're broken, but because you're finally done being used. And that's where this begins. 5 shifts. 5 ruthless, unflinching ways to pull your emotions out of their hands and place them back in yours. They won't clap for this version of you. They'll be scared of it. And that's how you'll know it's working. Because once you master these 5, No one will ever be able to control you again. Not with silence, not with love, not with absence. You will become the calm in the chaos, the stillness they can't read, the force they can't reach. And they'll wonder what happened to you. But you won't answer, because the version of you that needed them to understand is already gone. Let's begin. 1. Feel nothing when they betray you. They didn't change. You just finally saw who they always were. You kept giving them the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself they were just hurting, just confused, just going through something, but they weren't. They knew exactly what they were doing. They just didn't think you'd catch on. And even when you did, you still gave them another chance. Because somewhere deep down, you believed that love could fix it. That loyalty could repair what was rotting. But you didn't realize you weren't fixing anything. You were just delaying the collapse. The truth? They didn't switch up. They just stopped pretending. That betrayal you're still reeling from? It didn't start the moment they left. It started when they realized they could hurt you, and you'd stay. It was supposed to be real. A friendship, a love, a bond you could trust, someone who said all the right things until it came time to prove them. One moment they're by your side. The next, they vanish. No closure, no honesty, just silence. And when you finally got the courage to ask, "Why did you do that to me?" they flipped the story. You're too sensitive. You overreact. You're imagining things. And suddenly, you're apologizing for your own wounds. That's not misunderstanding. That's gaslighting. And when it happens over and over, you begin to collapse from the inside. You second-guess yourself. You replay conversations. You blame your instincts. You start to think maybe you were the problem. But here's what betrayal really teaches you. It's not that they were heartless. It's that they never had to be honest, because you never demanded it, and they counted on that. They counted on your silence, on your softness, on your ability to forgive before you even understood what broke you. That's why it hurt so bad. Because they weren't some villain in the dark. They were the one you trusted most. And when they betrayed you, it shattered your entire framework of reality. You didn't just lose a person. You lost yourself for a while. You questioned your worth. You questioned your memory. You questioned if love even exists. But that collapse, that emotional blackout, that's where the power lives. Because in that numbness, you stopped pretending. You stopped romanticizing red flags. You stopped covering up their lies with your hope. And for the first time in your life, you saw clearly. Emotional detachment isn't cold, it's clean. It's choosing facts over fantasy. Choosing peace over performance. Choosing to observe instead of absorb. You don't heal by feeling more. You heal by feeling less, strategically. It's not about becoming heartless, it's about becoming selective. Because not everyone deserves access to the version of you that feels everything. And when you finally decide to cut emotional ties with people who stabbed you in the back and still expected you to apologize for bleeding, that's not coldness, that's closure. You don't need their side of the story. You lived it. You don't need revenge. You already survived what they did. The real power is when you can stand in front of everything that once broke you and feel nothing. Because you don't care to explain. You don't care to fix. You just don't care. Not out of bitterness, out of balance. And that's what shakes them the most. The version of you that once begged for honesty is now silent. Not because you lost, but because you won something deeper. Self-respect. And that version can't be touched. But what happens after betrayal is worse. When the silence sets in, when the world doesn't stop for your pain, when you're alone with the wreckage, and you still have to function. That's when the real war begins, and that's where we go next. 2. Feel nothing when they ignore you. They don't reach out because they know you still care. That phone you keep checking, it won't ring. That message you keep drafting, rewriting, deleting, rewriting again, don't send it. Because the silence you're drowning in, it's not accidental. It's calculated. People don't ignore what they value. They ignore what they believe will wait, no matter how badly it's treated. And that's what you became to them. A sure thing. A safe harbor. The one who always forgives, always answers, always tries. So when they stopped calling, when they stopped checking in, it wasn't because they forgot you. It was because they knew you hadn't forgotten them. That's the quietest kind of pain, not betrayal, but abandonment without explanation. being ghosted by someone you thought would be there forever, being discarded like a phase when they swore you were permanent. They said, "I'm just going through a lot." And so you waited. But days turned to weeks, weeks into months, and eventually you stopped counting. But deep down, you still hoped. You checked their stories, you scanned their feed, you replayed old memories like maybe something still meant something. But it didn't, not to them. Because if it did, you wouldn't be alone with the pieces. That's when it hits you. You weren't chosen, you were convenient. And when people no longer need your energy, your love, your support, they vanish. Not with a storm, but with silence. And that silence, it eats you alive. Because no one warns you that indifference is colder than hate. At least hate means you mattered. But this makes you feel invisible, unworthy, forgettable. But here's where it shifts. Silence is not empty. It's full of answers, full of truth, full of power. Because when no one else is there, when your name is no longer in anyone's mouth, you're finally free to hear your own voice. You stop performing. Stop explaining. Stop shrinking. And in that void, you get dangerous. Because nothing sharpens a person like being left with their own echo. You learn to walk without applause, to create without validation, to grow without being seen. They think they hurt you, but they gifted you solitude. And solitude isn't punishment, it's purification. Every distraction gone, every false friend removed, every fake attachment exposed. You stop needing closure because their silence is the closure. You stop chasing people who made you beg for crumbs, and instead you start feeding yourself. The silence that once tortured you becomes your sanctuary. The place you rebuild, the place you refocus, the place you remember exactly who you are. Without their approval, without their love, without their texts that only came when they needed something. That's when you realize you don't want them back. You want you back. The version of you that didn't shrink for people who never saw your worth. The version that didn't stay silent just to keep the peace. The version that isn't afraid to be alone because you're not alone. You're with someone who finally gives a damn about you. They thought you'd wait forever. They thought they could go ghost and walk back in like nothing happened. But the next time they try, they won't recognize you because you disappeared too. But not to hide, to rebuild, to rewire, to reemerge unrecognizable. Not colder, but clearer. Not bitter, but bulletproof. Not wounded, but untouchable. That's what silence gives you. Not revenge, but rebirth. The world respects you when you disappear and return unrecognizable. But how do you rebuild in silence when the noise in your own mind never stops? That's where we go next. 3. Feel nothing when you're tested. Life will throw hell at you just to see if you flinch. They say pressure reveals character, but that's a lie. Pressure doesn't just reveal who you are, it destroys who you were and dares you to rebuild something stronger in its place. This is the story of a man who had everything. Respect, love, a business that fed his family, a future that looked secure, certain, untouchable. And then it all fell apart, not slowly, violently. A phone call, a betrayal, a lawsuit, a loss, one after another, the kind of collapse that makes people disappear. First the calls stop, then the support dries up, then the friends go quiet. Suddenly the ones who used to clap the loudest are nowhere to be found. But he didn't scream, he didn't beg, he didn't even speak. He did something far more terrifying. He went silent. Because when you're in the fire, you don't waste energy proving you're not burning. You learn to walk through it without making a sound. This is what they don't tell you about pain. Pain doesn't knock. It kicks in the door and strips everything that made you feel safe. And if you flinch, if you panic, if you react emotionally, you lose every time. Because life doesn't just test your strength, it tests your ability to stay calm in chaos. That's why you have to feel nothing when everything is crumbling. You don't cry when they walk away. You don't panic when the money disappears. You don't lash out when the betrayal cuts deep. You watch, you observe, you study the storm, and then you move strategically, like a lion in tall grass, still, quiet, calculating. Not because he's weak, but because he's waiting. That's how you survive. Not by roaring, but by controlling when, where, and if you respond. Because when you stop reacting, you start winning. There's power in emotional neutrality. The ability to feel without becoming what you feel. The ability to be hurt without becoming bitter. To lose everything and not lose yourself. Most people break at the first crack in the glass. But the dangerous ones? They bend, they stretch, they adapt, they watch the fire surround them and walk straight through it. Because they know something the world underestimates. Composure is a weapon. When you're composed, you can't be manipulated, you can't be baited, you can't be controlled, you become unpredictable. And in a world that feeds off your reaction, that's the greatest advantage you'll ever have. This man lost everything, twice, and every time he came back quieter, harder, sharper. Not because he didn't feel the pain, but because he didn't react to it. He sat with it, he studied it, he learned from it, and he waited until the pain stopped being a wound and became a weapon. Now people say he's cold, that he's different, that he changed. They're right, because pain has two choices: break you or rebuild you. But there's one truth no one can escape. Don't react. Observe. That's how lions hunt. And if you learn that, if you master that level of control, you'll start seeing the game before anyone else even knows they're playing it. But even lions bleed. And sometimes, even when you've mastered the hunt, the predator becomes the prey. That's when the real test begins. When you're wounded and no one is coming to save you. So what do you do when the bleeding doesn't stop? When the roar in your chest is begging to break through? When being cold isn't enough? We're about to find out. 4. Feel nothing. They only clap when they need you again. First, they ignore you. Then they mock you. Then, they see something in you they can no longer deny. And suddenly, the applause starts, but it's not what it seems. Because when you rise from the ashes, they don't cheer because you made it. They cheer because they're hoping to stand close enough to steal the warmth. This is the story of a man who climbed out of his own grave. Not literally, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. When he was broken, they were silent. When he was lost, they looked away. When he asked for help, they changed the subject. But when he started to win, they remembered his name. They started saying, "I always knew." They never knew. They just didn't want to be the last ones to clap. See, applause isn't about you. It never was. It's about them. Their insecurity, their ego, their fear of being left behind by the very person they once overlooked. You think it's love. It's utility. They support you, so they can use you. They say, "You're amazing." What they mean is, "Your shine makes me feel important." But the moment you stop performing, the moment you stop giving, entertaining, validating, they vanish. This is why you must feel nothing when the hands start clapping, because if you're addicted to their praise, you'll be enslaved by their silence. They only come close when you're rising, and they only stay long enough to benefit. Then, they vanish again, just like before, and you're left wondering, was any of it real? It wasn't. Fame, praise, recognition, it's all paper fire. It looks bright, but it doesn't keep you warm. It burns quickly and leaves you emptier than before. But here's the twist. The applause isn't the reward. The work is. The late nights, the silent battles, the invisible sacrifices no one will ever see. That's what made you who you are. So when they finally clap, you nod, politely, and then you walk away. Because your power was never in their praise. It was in your discipline. Your ability to keep going when no one cared. That's what built you. And now that they care again, you don't need it. You're no longer fueled by their attention. You're driven by something far more dangerous. A mission. A man driven by applause is a puppet, but a man driven by purpose is a problem. Because he doesn't need to be seen, he doesn't need to be liked, he doesn't even need to be understood, he just needs to build, grow, win, silently. That's true power. Not the kind that roars, but the kind that moves without warning. So next time they clap, feel nothing. Because the ones who doubted you will return, confused by your strength, and the ones who cheered will fade again when the spotlight shifts. But your silence, your focus, your why, that's permanent. They cheer because it serves them. You rise because it serves your mission. Don't let their hands control your momentum, because if the clapping stops and so do you were never in control. Let them watch in silence. Let them whisper. Let them guess what's next, because you're not done. And in the final chapter, you don't just return stronger, you return unrecognizable. 5. Feel nothing for who you used to be. Who you were is the reason they thought they could play you. They didn't underestimate you, they underestimated who you used to be. The soft one, the emotional one, the over-explainer, the over-lover, the one who forgave too quickly, tolerated too much, and broke quietly. That's the version they knew. That's the version they thought would never change. And that's why they never feared losing you. But that version of you is gone, because at some point, the pain becomes so loud. You stop negotiating with the past. You stop revisiting the scenes that hurt you. You stop explaining your value. You stop craving closure. And instead, you go dark. You go quiet. You rebuild, not to prove them wrong, but to become someone so powerful where they no longer have access to your world. This is the part they don't see. The silent mornings, the lonely nights, the war in your head where you finally make a decision. I will never go back. Not to the people, not to the patterns, not to the mindset that allowed the pain in. Because healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about becoming unrecognizable to everything that once broke you. And that means killing your old self, not mourning it, not healing it, not loving it through the journey. No, you bury it. You let it die so something stronger can live. They used to mock your silence. Now they're confused by it. They used to take your kindness for weakness. Now they fear your distance. And they should. Because what's more terrifying than someone who feels nothing for their past? Someone who doesn't flinch when the old wounds are reopened. Someone who no longer chases familiar chaos. Someone who walks past their old temptations like they never existed. That's not ego. That's evolution. You didn't glow up. You hardened. You didn't find yourself. You built yourself from scratch. Steel bones, quiet mind, eyes that have seen hell and no longer blink at fire. You don't miss who you were. You respect what it took to kill them. The late nights of self-doubt. The early mornings of grinding while no one noticed. The ugly parts. The nights you cried alone and still showed up with a straight face. That was the cost of transformation. And now you move different. You talk less, you observe more, you walk into rooms they never thought you'd enter, speak on stages they never thought you'd reach, make moves they never saw coming. Because that old version of you was predictable, emotional, exposed. But this version, cold, calm, free. People will say you changed. Let them. They were only comfortable with the version of you they could use. Control, gaslight, dismiss. They don't get to meet this version. They don't deserve to. To become unrecognizable, you must first betray who you used to be. And now that you have, you don't owe the past a thing. No explanation, no visit, no guilt, because the only thing the old you would say, if they could see you now, is this: finally, you made it. But here's the twist. You're not finished. Because becoming unrecognizable wasn't the final act. It was the beginning. And now the world sees you and wonders how they never saw you before. You felt everything. Then you felt nothing. And now you feel powerful. If you buried your old self and never looked back, comment, "It's done." Let them know the real you has arrived. Control isn't about dominance. It's about indifference. You don't feel because you've already decided who you are. You've walked through fire and ice, seen betrayal peel away your skin, felt silence whisper when the world turned its back, withstood the tests that could have shattered steel, and ignored applause that never belonged to you. Now, this is the truth that remains. Control is not about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself. Not through brute force, but through indifference. Not feeling everything, but feeling only what serves your purpose. Because when you feel too much, you give them your weapon. You hand them the controls. But when you feel nothing, not because you're broken, but because you've chosen it, you become unbreakable. Remember the 5 shifts that brought you here. 1, to feel nothing when they betray you, so you see clearly instead of bleeding blindly. 2, to feel nothing when they ignore you, turning silence into your secret power. 3, to feel nothing when life tests you, standing cold and steady while others flinch. 4, to feel nothing for the applause, knowing their cheers are fleeting, but your mission eternal. 5, to feel nothing for who you used to be, burying the old you to unlock the unstoppable new you. Together, these shifts aren't just survival tactics. They're the blueprint for mastery. To master life, you must learn to feel nothing when it matters most. Not numbness, not emptiness, but precision control over your emotions, using them as tools, not chains. Because the world will try to drag you into chaos, to pull you back into old patterns of pain, regret, and reaction. But now, you stand as the weapon, silent, calm, lethal in your focus. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. You don't need to explain. You simply are. And that is the most dangerous power there is. If this hit you deep, if you're ready to armor up and take back control, comment below. I choose silence. Share this with someone who needs to hear this today. Because the world isn't waiting to be kind, it's waiting to see who's ready to be unshakable. You are that person. You are the weapon now.